Stephen Kavanagh, the Chief Constable of this fantastic organisation, Essex Police. So often my officers are out there on the streets with your street pastors, often on a Friday, Saturday night, dealing with a variety of issues across the county, particularly in Billericay and other places, just looking at what's going on. Sometimes those underlying issues that as police officers we don't have the time to look at. What I love about the pastors is that they're in communities, working with communities, and they care deeply about things like antisocial behaviour, but not just those symptoms, about who's doing it, why they're doing it, and what else could be done to try and give sometimes some decent young people another opportunity at doing something a little bit different. So whether it's the work shoulder to shoulder, you've been working with and doing a new initiatives around Friday, Saturday nights up in Colchester as well. I know that the way policing is at the moment, and we're the cheapest force in the country per head of population, things are too thinly stretched for my officers. So when I've been out on patrol and I've seen people who've got too worse for wear, who are then vulnerable to predators, vulnerable to robbery, vulnerable to assaults, all of those things, suddenly you see these people dressed in blue with street pastors on their back or on their hats, suddenly looking after them, taking care of them, making sure they can get home safe. It's something that Essex needs, and it's a real privilege for Essex Police to be working alongside your people. One thing that the street pastors will do is when they're working with officers, whether that's missing vulnerable children, we know streets are more complex. We know that there are different things that can go on and harm them, whether that is because they've had too much to drink or taken drugs, whether it's because they're vulnerable to sexual exploitation, whether it's they've gone missing and they're in trouble. You know, your colleagues are out there night in, night out, just those eyes and ears on the streets, making sure that those connections are made. And what I love is, you know, people are worried sometimes that the street pastors are going to try and bring religion into everything, and they're not. They're there as members of the community who care, who see a gap, who want to do something different. And we've seen examples of missing children being found more quickly. We've seen examples of people who needed to be receive some medical treatment, being given it rather than blocking up other places, you referring them to sometimes SOS buses and other colleagues who work with us around those nighttime economies. You know, Essex is a safe place, but it's safer because of things like the street pastors. One particular example is a young woman who was vulnerable. We knew that she was likely to be groomed by somebody, and I know that the pastors, using social media and other ways to get the information out there, used their network, and by doing so they helped us identify much more quickly than otherwise where she was and what we could do to help her. Without that type of support, without linking into issues like the SOS buses, the street pastors, the parish volunteers, you know, the police, active citizens, everything is just too rigid in how we look after vulnerable people who are out there, or to prevent crime. And I think that's one thing that's lost, is on that nighttime economy piece, your presence can calm someone who's a little bit aggressive down, because you're not an enforcement body. You're there to look after that nighttime community, and you'll see somebody getting a little bit too noisy, a little bit too aggressive, and just a friendly word can sometimes help bring that down. And then my officers are getting on with other things. It's a network of people working together for the good of this county, and that's what makes it special. Another important example was following that sad death of the Polish gentleman in Harlow. I was actually out on patrol in Harlow, and what I'm very much aware of is, you know, sometimes communities who don't always have the same links in terms of communication, infrastructure into the council, into the police, need that other element of reassurance. And I'm aware that following certain incidents in Harlow and Southend, the street pastors have gone beyond their normal role. They've gone out on patrol to talk to people, to try and provide that reassurance that sometimes, particularly if people's experience of police it has been different or less than positive, we need those other ways of letting them know that together this county will look after them, and that they are safe, and that the tragedies happen, but we will work together to work our way through them. I know particular examples that we were discussing earlier on. You were talking about the launch of the rail pastors, and you know, both in terms of the vulnerability of people moving around the county on that line out of Liverpool Street out towards Chelmsford and out into Suffolk and Norfolk. We know that there are vulnerable people on those trains. Sometimes they're vulnerable because of people grooming them. Sometimes they're vulnerable because of of the night that they've had. But also, sadly, what we're seeing at the moment is far too many young people suffering with that anxiety and depression, thinking about taking their own lives. So the idea of the pastors working with the rail network for that early intervention, trying to prevent that harm, give those often young people, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're older, that opportunity to have an alternative choice, absolutely key for the future. And I know there are two other elements I think that are interesting. The police officers that we used to have in schools are no longer there. Through cuts, they are increasingly focused on response type policing. That leaves a gap. Sometimes young people don't feel that they can talk to the teachers, they do want somebody to talk to. And if there is a gap there, the idea that the street pastors can work in schools more effectively to look at some of that would be very important. And the other bit that I think as our community ages, and apparently Essex is the quickest ageing community, if that makes sense, in the country, there are issues of isolation, loneliness, sometimes poor health, sometimes dementia. And we find those people on the streets late at night. And last night was -5. The ability to identify vulnerability in those terms and work more effectively. It's the glue. It's the glue that the street pastors bring. They hold things together for Essex, and I think it's a really special endeavour. Real privilege for me, I think it was earlier this year when I went to St Andrew's Church in Sandon to see some of the street pastors being inducted into the scheme. Real honour for me to see that, to see their energy, to see their values about trying to help the society that they live in. Too many people sit back now, and I call them the commentators in life. They'll sit back and watch things go wrong. They'll sit back and watch someone get themselves into a difficult situation. The street pastors aren't the commentators. They're on the field, playing the game, doing the right thing. And I think what we've got to do together is think about how we can build on that, because this is a very powerful model. I first experienced street pastors back in 2005 when I was the chief superintendent up in Barnet in North London. They were a force for good then. They're constantly evolving, and as we see these new harms, the number of young people in trouble, suicidal thoughts, depression, anxiety, who are suddenly there out on the street, sometimes the nighttime economy, sometimes other ways. What we need to do together is say, police, street pastors, anybody who wants to help our society, our communities more effectively, what do we need to be doing? And I'm up for the challenge on how we should do that. If you are a street pastor and you are out there on the Fridays and Saturday nights, you're not listening as a commentator, but you're out there doing it, I can't thank you enough. Giving up your time to help my colleagues and to help those who are in trouble is a really special endeavour, and it means the world to this county and to me, so thank you very much indeed. For those of you who are watching and who are at risk of becoming commentators, you might live in somewhere like Grays, like Canvey Island, like Rayleigh. Have a chat with your minister. Think about the good you can bring to your community, the difference you can make, the lives you might save, how you can work alongside my officers, maybe sometimes away from them, but you can make a massive difference. Think about it, because street pastors in Essex make an enormous difference, and I'm very grateful to them.